pleasure to share this space with you all for what I feel is an important and meaningful conversation, one that has intrigued me as the chaplain and imam and student of Islam, has left many curious and wondering about our tradition, our practice of sisters offering dua at our Jummah prayer service. It has served as affirmation, healing for many in the space. They've said that to me and to others. It has left an impression on almost everyone who comes into our space. And so I was wondering, now going into my 5th year, why hasn't anyone asked me why are sisters giving dua after Jummah? When I go to the masjid, I don't see it. When I was in school at my university, that wasn't the practice. So why at Princeton University? I would claim it, but it's not mine to claim the tradition. We have our wonderful sister Arshi Ahmed, the wife of Imam Sohaib Sultan, who was here before me and had the weighty decision, the challenge, and I like to say moral courage to make a decision of having sisters offer dua in our shared and sacred space. There's a lot to say about Imam Sohaib's decision making. He not only depended on Allah and prayed to Allah about these decisions, but also reached out to many friends and learned scholars, teachers, and mentors. This decision wasn't an easy decision almost 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, but was a much needed decision. And hopefully Arshi, I'm sure Arshi will share some of the background and the history and the story behind our tradition that I think most of us at this table, if not all of us, are proud to claim and be part of. I want to say just quickly before we ask our sister Arshi to really share the story of how this came to be. Give us a bit of the behind the scenes, maybe a narrative, offer some insights into the decision-making process, but perhaps even more so, simply what it means to her. I think at the end of the day, it's about what does it mean to each of us, and particularly the women in our spaces. And I think part of my comments really are more from a chaplain perspective. Knowing Sohaib as I did, or as I do, I know that this decision wasn't made to be cool, to be like the hip, progressive Muslim chaplain. It came from a deep pastoral sense, a place of compassion and a place of listening. Listening to his students, listening to his community, their needs, and then trying to respond to those in the best way that he knew how. And so what I most appreciate about our practice is that it came from a place of care and concern, an ethic of listening and an ethic of compassion. And so I want to say that. I think that's a good place for me to stop, and for Arshi to start with our story, and obviously whatever she would like to say. Imam Sohaib made this decision, in which we are grateful for and continue to honor this decision and this practice and this tradition. My hope is not only in this conversation to learn the story of how this came to be, but also help us ground this practice in Islam, in the Islamic tradition, in the prophetic model, and also in a lived tradition, a lived practice all over the world. Women are having their voices amplified in sacred spaces. And so it's wonderful to know that we also can ground this conversation in what is sacred, not just sisters' concerns and their needs and their voices, but also respecting our tradition, respecting Islam in the process. I think that's where some of the tensions are. I think, some think that Imam Khalil started this whole practice, you know, and I didn't. Someone I think is probably far more learned and scholarly, and I think living out the prophetic model than I, and that's my brother Imam Sohaib. So I'm honored to continue this tradition, to have Archie join us, to share with us what she'd like to share. And we'll riff a little bit. If you all know jazz, if you're riffing, you know, someone's playing and now listen, add a little this and that. We'll try not to get in the way of each other, but we do also invite you all to share your thoughts. Some of you all, I'm looking at least 3, maybe 4, 5, 6. Almost all these sisters have given the dua. Have you given the dua?
I've been avoiding it for years.
Okay. So Melissa, we can. So it's coming.
We'll talk.
All of
No.
that have offered dua, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts and why it feels important. What are some of the challenges for your peers in doing so? Our brothers, I'm happy to see you. I would have loved to have even more of us as I appreciate it. Thank you. It is as important to me to affirm and confirm and amplify women's voices as it is to help our young men, right, follow more closely in the footsteps of the prophetic tradition of amplifying women's voices, centering their voices. And it's important as a father of 8 boys that I have these conversations with my children, because they too will be husbands, they will be fathers, and it's important that they understand that they need to listen to the women in their lives. I try to practice it as much as you all know my wife. I try to practice listening to her as much as possible. And I think that I find in my own reading, the prophet did the same thing. He listened to the women in this community. He made decisions that I think we all have benefited from. So without anything else to say, I would like to ask our beloved sister Archie Ahmed to share. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presence.
Thank you so much, Imam Khalil. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. May the peace and blessings be with you. You know, I just really wanted to thank Imam Khalil for this opportunity. I think that in itself shows his compassion and care for women's voices, for the different conversations that should happen in the community. So I'm really grateful for that. And I also wanted to start off by sort of talking about the title. You know, we had sort of spoken, and the title "God Knows Best" was sort of put out there, and it may seem unique or a little bit cryptic to some, but where it comes from is that this book that my late husband Sohaib Sultan, former Muslim chaplain here, had written with Martin Wynn. I'll talk after this. It's right over there. That was my daughter, Lydia, our daughter. And so this book that was written, American Muslim Guide to the Art and Life of Preaching, by Sohaib Sultan and Martin Wynn. You know, in chapter 5 at the end it says, and Allah and God knows best, right? And so I think it's a beautiful place to start, because I think in anything that we do in our lives as Muslims, like, we should obviously have intention, and we should have faith and trust in sort of asking God for what's best for us. And I think anything that we do at the end, we say, and God knows best, because we don't. And I think we humble ourselves to say we're trying our best, but only God knows best in His ultimate wisdom and knowledge. And so I think it's a great place to start, saying that, we're trying our best, and you know but things can be improved, things can be changed, and we're still learning. I think having that sort of open mindset helps in any sort of space, in terms of listening to the other. I mean, knowing that other people have so much to sort of give to us, and we can really learn from each other. Um, and so, also just these idea of the conversations. I think this is something that I saw Imam Khalil obviously do with the Muslim Life program, and something that Sohaib, used to have. You used to have these Islamic conversation series. And I think it was really about the conversations, because really, whether it's in a smaller setting, in a larger setting, that's where, like, the issues that are important to people arise, and where you can listen to each other and have discussions to see what's important. And we might think we have covered a lot of bases, but you would realize that people have so many different concerns. Everyone is coming from a different space, a different place, and we might be similar in so many ways, but also have different concerns, depending on our experiences and needs. And I think that in particular to this conversation, I think, the conversations about women's voices, women's spaces, there's still a lot of conversation to be had. And this is in the crux of, obviously, an umbrella space of just spirituality in general. How do you access deen? How do you access religious spaces for everybody? But then sort of kind of being like, okay, what about the female? What about the mothers? What about the marginalized? What about those who might need certain things, whether they're hard of hearing, or, I mean, there's so many people who are in need, who want to access these spiritual, sacred spaces. So just knowing that these conversations are so important, and we need to, I think if you, I think, and I'm saying this to empower us, because I think a lot of us sometimes feel that who are we to say something? But what I'm saying is that you're absolutely the right person to say, this is an important conversation to be had. Let me find the people who will listen to me. Let me find, other people in institutions that are willing to listen to us and change their spaces to accommodate. So to not be shy about having conversations and bringing up things and ideas that you might have. And okay, so that's good. I wanted to, Bismillah, start with a verse from the Quran. And this verse is so dear to me, because when I met Sohaib, and we were going to get married, and my beautiful daughter is coming in. Okay, good. She's telling me she's almost done with her math homework. This is very important in our lives, so this is a big dua.
Happy.
When we were getting married, we were thinking about different party favors, and back in the day, there weren't that many things, I guess, and I just also was sort of thinking outside the box. I wanted something a little bit more religiously in tune, so I thought of this idea of having a verse from the Quran printed on something, and I put a magnet behind it. So I remember having this large sort of magnet we're sitting. And what verse did I choose? I chose the verse from Surah Al-Ahzab, chapter 33, ayah 35, and I'll read the translation. And it read, "For men and women who are devoted to God, believing men and women, obedient men and women, truthful men and women, steadfast men and women, humble men and women, charitable men and women, fasting men and women, chaste men and women who remember God often, God has prepared forgiveness and a rich reward." And I think this verse, the Quran is full of wisdoms wherever you look. But this one in particular, for me, spoke to my heart. Because it spoke to my soul as someone who wanted to practice her faith, and sometimes felt like, does God see me as an equal? And I knew from the beginning that God did. but it was just sort of like a reminder and confirmation of that it really is our soul that God is looking at. Obviously, we are, our gender matters, and there's beautiful roles for men and women, and we bring different things to the spaces, but really as a spiritual devotee, it is beyond our gender, and I think this verse really spoke to that. So I just wanted to start off by mentioning that verse that's dear to me. And what's interesting is as I was doing some research for this talk, I realized that one of the companions of the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, Nusayba bin Ka'b, who is a beautiful personality. She was an intellectual. She was on the battlefield. There was a time where she sat with the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, and she asked him a question about women and their sort of role, and because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed this verse, which obviously affirms this idea of women and their piety and what reward they will give. So it really tied into this space, and I was like, Allah, like this totally for me just comes full circle, and I didn't even know that until I did some research, and which also goes to show is that we have so much learning to do in our own tradition, that is, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Hadith, or whether it's like the larger space of the different traditions that are in different countries throughout the world and in different Islamic spaces. And so from here I want to sort of transition to the idea that Imam Khalil sort of raised, was just the idea of the prophetic concern. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may peace and blessings be upon him, he was concerned about everyone and everything, right? He was sent as a mercy for everybody. And for me actually to do this talk on like one of the last days of Rabi al-Awwal is really special, because this is the month that he was born, the month that he passed away. This is a very special month. This is, really for me, over time realizing that his presence in our lives is paramount, and our love for him, really needs to be strengthened, and to know him and to know about his life and what he spoke about and how he lived will really help us in our own spaces and learning and growth, right? And so the prophetic model, he was all about whether it was education, knowledge for both genders, right? He encouraged women to seek knowledge. In particular, like we see that there's so many hadith that were transmitted by Aisha radiallahu anha, right? Like his wife. And there were so many scholars, obviously, since then, women scholars who have, contributed to these spaces. Also, the idea of spiritual and religious inclusion, it was paramount in his sort of prophetic narrative. Women attended his gatherings at the mosque. They asked questions openly. There were points where they sat with him separately, and he agreed and taught them directly. If there was a question, he engaged with it. So there was never a point where women were sidelined or their questions were sidelined, right? And he listened to their complaints and gave them advice. And on the other hand, he also consulted with women, right, and sought their advice. Whether it was Khadija from the beginning, Khadija radiallahu anha, his blessed wife, who was there through his most important when as revelation is coming down, and she's there as his protector. Or whether it was Salama, who like gave advice during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, where there was this tension and a tense situation, and she gave him advice. The Prophet ﷺ like really engaged and sought advice from people. And so I wanted to set that as a framework, because I think for me, like, Sahib, my late husband, who was a Muslim chaplain here, during whose time like this sort of space and this idea of the dua model came to be, loved the Prophet, and he really wanted to emulate the Prophet. He lived prophetically, and I saw that in whether it was out here or at home. Like he really, just in all manners, really loved the Prophet and wanted to represent him, and teach us what it meant to be like the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so that's why it's so important to sort of know the Prophet's life, because that is where Sahib was coming from. And it's important because, you know, like, you think about, like, you know, why do you trust someone's, decision or space? You know, you get to know them and you see where are they coming from, what have they learned, what are they rooted under, and you know, subhanAllah, Sahib really, you know, wanted to live prophetically. And so, you know, when he was appointed to be chaplain in 2008, you know, we came down to New Jersey. Now, like, the story time begins, like, a little bit, I guess. And, you know, obviously, Murray Dodge Hall, which is the Office of Religious Life on campus at Princeton University, is home to different religious communities, including the Muslim community. There's a prayer room on the 3rd floor. The Jummah space is on the 1st floor in a space that's used for different things. And, you know, and it's a beautiful space. I mean, I've been there now so many years, and it's gone through different renovation and things like that. And Jummah was a joyous time. He loved Jummah. He brought, like, spirit. He brought spirit all the time, but joyfully, like, Jummah was really, like, one of the most blessed days. I never saw him, like, sad. Like, he was always so happy on Jummah. And so, you know, Jummah was really special and sacred. I loved coming to Jummah as well, and I wasn't always as happy as him, but alhamdulillah, but that's what he taught us. And one of the things that I remember, like, one of the things that was frustrating for me, and this is where my sort of story, or like my concerns, and I would tell him that was feeling like I would come to Jummah, and our Jummah space at Murray Dodge was like most spaces, you know, the front lines have the men, and the back space has the women, and it's a large space, so that's how it's sort of set up. It's one large space. And I remember coming to Jummah early most times because I'm helping set up and different things, and I'm sitting there and I'm ready to listen to a khutbah, and then mashallah, like, you know, a Muslim male congregant comes in, stands right in front of me and starts praying their sunnah, right? And blocks sort of my view. And it's not about me. I'm not trying to make this about me, but it was about the idea of feeling like, hey, like, you know, it was a barrier for me. It was a distraction for me. And we talk about these spaces, right? Like, in any sort of spiritual space, like, you want to be present, and distractions come in so many different forms. But for me, this was one of the things. And the other thing that I experienced was when they would go into sujood, or where they would pray, sometimes their clothing would not be as modest, and that would be also tough for some of the women who were behind them to witness, right? And so that kind of continued for years, obviously, right? It was something that I mentioned to Sahib. So we actually tried different models. He said, let's create a sunnah room. So, you know, so he was listening, right? Like, so when, if a brother came in after the khutbah started, he said, let's go to the sunnah room. So that kind of helped in that space. So there's always that sort of listening and sort of trying to figure out what can we do to enhance people's spiritual experiences, right? And so, you know, it was the year 2016, and it was an interesting year because Murray Dodge Hall was going through renovation. And so we ended up at another building across the street called Green Hall. And that was an interesting room. It was a large room, but it was an interesting entrance to it and things like that. And that was the year when, you know, a few female Muslim students came to Sahib and sort of kind of voice their concerns. And I want to read from this book a little bit because it kind of frames that narrative in his voice. And so I was approached with concerns over the role of women in the Friday prayer service. A group of young university students came to me as their chaplain to start a conversation on how we might rethink our Friday prayer service at Princeton University to be more gender inclusive. Their genuine concerns raised an important question. How could Jummah, the weekly celebration of our coming together in faith, be made more welcoming, encompassing, and spiritually empowering for the community's women and men? The students who raised these questions were well-intentioned and sincere. As they shared their perspective and stories, those students revealed that there was a real hurt associated with not seeing women preach or partake in offering religious wisdom on this important occasion of the Friday prayer. Quote, "It's almost like we don't exist," end quote, was just one of the sentiments shared by these students. They didn't feel represented. They didn't feel represented. They did not feel like they truly belonged. And, this is not unique to just these students. I mean, this is a feeling that I and others have felt, and we've tried to work through it, and we've obviously, like, my connection to God in these spaces is paramount. So, you work around it and you sort of accept what's there, right? But it's something that I struggled with myself, like going to Jummah prayers. I went to NYU as an undergrad, and sort of feeling like it's not me up there in the sense that there's not a female voice. Sometimes, like, there's also certain topics that might not be covered, or just representation in that way, like not seeing yourself, right? And so it's something that I could connect with. And so, at this point, like, Sohaib, obviously, as a chaplain, right, like, he is sitting with, this sort of pastoral sensibility that he has, right? That as a chaplain, listening to his students, any of his students, and having compassion and care for their concerns. And, obviously people would come with different sort of concerns and stuff, but this one I think weighed heavy on him. He really felt like he wanted to address it. It wasn't, I think it was something that was being layered, and it's something that he was thinking about in other ways. And as I know Sohaib, and as you all know Sohaib, centering women's voices was just part of Muslim Life program. It was from the beginning, like, wanting to invite Muslim women speakers, making sure that things were balanced in terms of who's on a panel. If there is an imbalance, who can the moderator be? Whether there's a religious molid or gathering where it's, okay, can the host be a woman as well? Can a Quran recitation be done by a woman? I mean, this was part and parcel. Are some of the women teachers teaching some of these smaller classes? And there were so many, and I'm witness to this. And it wasn't always like, oh, I need a woman. Like, it was just part of the general aura of, like, these are scholars and these are teachers, and we're gonna learn from them. It wasn't meant to be genderfied in any way. So knowing that about Sahib and his ethos for the Princeton Muslim Life program, I think this definitely shows why this kind of sort of sat with him and weighed with him, weighed heavily on him. And at this point, obviously, he wants to do right by community, but he also wants to do right by Islamic tradition. He's not here to rock the boat. And this wasn't something that, was something that he was necessarily thinking of, but it came. And I think, obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts different sort of things in our lives. And at that point, like, we have to engage with it and figure out what to do. And I'll mention at this point that, he relied on his teachers. And I want to sort of say that Dr. Ingrid Mattson and Muhammad Majid from the Adams community down in Virginia were his primary teachers, and he had other teachers as well. But Dr. Ingrid Mattson, who was the director of the chaplaincy program at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, was his mentor, and he really, learned from her, and he really trusted her, and really, and she is such a wise person. And to just say to everyone that, one of Sahib's main teachers was a Muslim woman, and you don't always hear that. And I think hearing that is important. We should all sort of, mention that and make that a norm, and not just assume that, that they're all just male teachers behind someone. And it also goes to show, like, some of his pastoral tendencies and things like that, came from her guidance, right? And she has been there for so many Muslim chaplains in the university setting in America. And so, so we're at this point in the story where he sort of, this is weighing on him, and I saw sleepless nights because it was important to him, and it really, he wanted to do right by the community, do right by Islamic tradition, just make sure that this was, and then he knew that the decision laid on him because as the leader of the community, he needed to just sort of put it out there. So, I want to read a little bit of this part over here, um, where it says, how could the Muslim Life program then engage this issue in a productive and faithful way? These voices of these students needed to be felt, needed to be heard, and so we tried to have open discussions to work collectively towards a reasonable balance. Our initial conversations were respectful and honest, which set an important tone early on. Then I convened town hall meetings where the larger community could join to discuss everyone's concern and consider possible alternatives. We were looking for models of practice that we might implement that were respectful of the broad goal of inclusivity while still being permissible within the disclosed parameters of the Sharia, or sacred law. And together we debated and discussed the matter in consultation with Islamic scholars from a wide range of schools of thought in search of creative solutions. And I think that's just really so important to sort of say that, you know, that there is such a breadth of tradition that exists, so sort of tapping into these spaces. I think a lot of times we ourselves, I don't mean to say we are narrow-minded or have tunnel vision because we just don't know. And to be humble and say that there is a breadth of tradition, I'm still learning about so many different schools of thought and things, and sort of, you know, and so like to sort of say that he sort of consulted a wide range of schools of thought and looking for creative solutions. I think that's really, you know, very nice too. Like it doesn't, you know, like let's think outside of the box. Like this is, it hasn't been done doesn't mean that it can't be done, right? If it's done properly. And again, the matter being the spiritual well-being of our community of faith, and that at the end of the day is the most important, right? And so after these sort of town hall meetings and things like that, it was, you know, talking, consulting, you know, making dua, sleepless nights, like really, I saw a lot of sleepless nights. And so I love to sleep, so I was like, wow, like this is really like weighing on you. You know, mashallah, he came to this decision, you know, alhamdulillah, where he said, listen, like, we're going to consider changing the spatial layout of the space. Now, it wasn't just that, right? Like there were two things happening at once. And this is also very interesting as I was sitting and thinking about it. It's very interesting. I've been through this, but like this opportunity, giving this talk, made me sort of sit and reflect on some of these, the process that was happening. And there were two things happening concurrently, and I think that I think he was trying to, like, this is what we're talking about, the creative solutions, right? So now, how do we center women's voices, create a space that allows them to also feel included? So in terms of the spatial layout, so instead of having the men in the front and the women in the back, that space allowed, there was a door that allowed people to be side by side. Now, I know it sounds so like, oh my God, side by side. But you know what's interesting is that if you come to the Jummah at Princeton University, once you're sitting side by side, you actually don't even realize it's side by side. And I think that is to the beauty of how that space has worked out. Because at the end of the day, and whether it's Princeton, whether it's any other masajid, wherever you are, it's really your connection to Allah. You're sitting there trying to connect vertically at that point, right? You're trying to find that spiritual sort of connection with Allah. Obviously the khatib is right there, the person who's giving the sermon is right there. But really, whether it's Princeton or any other space, like we need to find that connection to Allah, to connection to God, right? And that's, this space allowed for it in this way, which doesn't mean that you can find that in any other space in masajid. So I'm not here to sort of be like, this is the only way. I found beautiful connection in other spaces and I've been sometimes in other downstairs spaces. I've been in balconies. I actually love the balcony model. I wish every place had like a balcony. I'm such a huge proponent of the balcony because I feel like it's such a great view down. But obviously that has limitations because you can't always access the imam if you need to, right? But there's just so many different models, and my point just sort of being that once you sit down in a space, it's really your connection to God that really matters. And so we created this space that would be side by side. Now, what's important in this is that you need proper separation, right? And how to do that with ihsan, how to do that with beauty. And that is something that Sohaib sort of brought, and we were discussing very, we had that discussion, and we had that discussion with other people in the community who were more creative than we were. And one of those people was Lindsay Stevenson, who was a grad student at the time, and other people who were carpenters from the community and trying to figure out how do we do this. And I remember going to Home Depot, and it's like that memory is core in my head. I think I have a picture of it too. If anyone wants to see it, I can share it. Because it was really funny because we got like this really large cart because we knew we needed to get some materials. We were trying to think, and Lindsay was like, okay, say like grab the large cart. And I remember him being really funny too because he was trying to ride the cart, which actually is very funny because Radia does that, and so many things about her that remind me of him, and vice versa. But it was just such a fun day at Home Depot. We went in the morning, and Lindsay's like, okay, like we need to figure out how can this be beautiful? And Saib's like, absolutely, because we want to do things with beauty. This is not about, and I think what's interesting is that even when I mention the divider, like I don't want to call it a barrier, I don't want to call it, it's like a separation, but I'm still always looking for the right word to use to sort of, say, because words matter, and they sort of like dictate what a thing means and what a space feels like. So I'm still kind of figuring out, but a beautiful barrier, I guess, in some ways, a beautiful separator. And so we went to one of the sections where they had these like nice little metal sort of ornamental kind of thing, and it was large. So we knew that the thing needed to not only separate, but be also tall enough that like if someone's standing, that they don't feel like that the men and women are so close to each other, right? So we were looking for things like that, and so we found it was basically like a vent grill. Like I think it was used as, normally people would buy that to put in front of their like heating unit. And we saw it and we're just like, that's what we want, that's what we need. And so we picked up, so many of those, and if you obviously, inshallah, if you ever come and pray at Princeton University, that's still there. So we're still using the prototype that we had from the beginning, and it was so beautiful because it was first it was like gold, so we liked that color. It was decorative, so that was nice. It wasn't solid, so it was kind of see-through, but not enough that you could see the other side. So it just had all of these elements of like flow, but it wasn't meant to just divide and like, or be an eyesore. And then we had to then we consulted with our friend Greg from the community, who was a carpenter, and sort of being like, how do we create something that is also accessible for us to break down every week for Jummah, because this is a multi-purpose space and we can't just always have things that are there all the time. So he thought of certain things, and it was a whole project actually. Some of the female students who brought this up, other people, we were painting outside of Green Hall. I remember this, like sitting outside, staining this wood speed. So it was like a very sort of creative together. It was like a project. It was a project for the community that came together. A lot of different hands on this, a lot of different hands that went on this. And so that's like the story behind like how this, this beautiful divider, this beautiful barrier was made. And it's integral to the space because you want to create something, but how do you do it in a way that's respectful, that's modest, and some of the women were sort of like, we don't want to be next to the men, and so it was like, I understand, then pray on the right side. So there's always these ways that you can do. And this, and I also want to sort of mention, this wasn't the first time that Princeton Muslim Life Program was thinking about spatial spaces. There's a thing called the Mizan retreat that we had, and inshallah we hope to have again, where it was a retreat, a 3-day retreat for students and community members, an overnight retreat. And one of the core things about that retreat was the prayer space. And from the beginning, we had decided that the prayer space would be side by side. And we had that same discussion earlier. So it was, and the reason we did that is because we realized that the prayer space was where everyone congregated, where there were announcements being made, where we wanted the women to do dhikr, we wanted them to have access to the imam, the other teachers in the front. And the side-by-side model just worked like really beautifully. And we saw it work at the Mizan retreat. So I just wanted to mention that as a little precedent, that it was something that was done yearly at the Mizan retreat. And so, okay, so we've created like the items that are needed. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like just facilitated ease as Murray Dodge was being renovated, I had mentioned, and so 2016 fall, September, we come back to this space, and there's this sort of, I guess, newness, and then we put this sort of separator thing, and then we also, this is where at the same time now that the dua model is being introduced, and then I'll speak to that in a second. So this is the spatial layout has changed, and now we're incorporating the women's voice, and what I mean by that is that one of the things that Sohaib, in consultation with his teachers and others, came up with was the idea of incorporating a dua in English after the Jummah khutbah is completed. And it's so novel, but it's so simple, and it's so beautiful. And I think that anyone who has sat through a Jummah, listening to a dua given by one of the sisters, one of the female Muslim students or community members, has been moved. And I think the idea of not only the woman's voice, but having it also in English, not, and Arabic is obviously so beautiful, and there's so many beautiful Quranic Arabic duas, but just to have it in the language of the land, the language that is understood, the language that speaks to a lot of people's hearts directly, because it is our native tongue, being from this country, I think really sort of, just took Jummah to another level. And then having everyone sort of be there to sort of participate to that, right? So, let me read, I think there was one part in this book that I wanted to speak to you about the dua. So, over here it talks about the dua model, right? Another creative practice that came out of our series of conversations is the practice of inviting a woman to offer a communal supplication, or dua, after the conclusion of the ritual prayer each week. And this idea originates from a spiritual tradition carried out by certain Sufi orders in West Africa. These communities gathered regularly to chant communally the remembrance of Allah, Dhikr, and at the end of these sessions, women offered dua to conclude the devotional gathering. Taking this practice as a model, we came up with the idea of having a woman give dua at the end of our weekly Friday prayer service. This would offer women within the community the opportunity to contribute a spiritual and moral message through the supplications that they would compose and deliver. They could uplift different aspects of the faith or draw attention to considerations and concerns that the male khatibs might have neglected or been unable to address due to the constraints of time. The women in our community who have undertaken this responsibility have offered beautiful, heartfelt duas. Their supplications continually move us deeply. The practice has become a cherished part of the spiritual and worship life of our community. I can say from my experience that the women of our congregation have added very special voices, tones, perspectives, and attitudes that have been nothing but enriching. They have raised matters of the heart, mind, and society that are often missed or overlooked by their male counterparts. In fact, because of the fine balance that this practice has struck for us, it is a model that we have decided to adopt most wholeheartedly. And, at the end of this book, there's certain duas that have been written, and I've always shared these duas, and one of my goals is to kind of compile some of these duas, because it really has been such a beautiful sort of part of just my spiritual upliftment. Okay, so then how else can I? So then we've dealt with the spatial space. Now we have the women's voices with the dua. Maybe at this point, there's this beautiful reflection from a student, but I kind of want to end with that. So I'm trying to see what else I can say. I think I kind of, our topic had the dua and dhikr model, so I'll just kind of squeeze in dhikr, which is a little bit, not different, obviously this is part of the Muslim Life Program ethos of being Muslim, to have dhikr, to have remembrance of God. But it is something sometimes forgotten, and because we are forgetful people as being human beings in general. And so one thing that was, so important to Sahib was the idea of incorporating dhikr into our daily lives. And then obviously including that, whether it was in his programming weekly, whether it was in his program with the Mawlid celebrations that he would have yearly. He really wanted the students and the community to understand that dhikr, which is a remembrance of God, through chanting, whether it was salawat, which is praising the Prophet Muhammad, through repetition and praise, that is really healing for the heart. And that is something that I necessarily did not grow up with, being Muslim American. Like, it's not something that necessarily my family practiced. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily come with. We knew some of the traditions, obviously, the easy ones. You can say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. But just to have like a little bit more than that, you can have that in moments, but just sort of say, sit with this, and this is healing, and let's learn a little bit more, or let's incorporate this weekly, or let's have a Mawlid celebration. Let's have a celebration to remember the birth and the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and let's make that joyous, and let's have poetry and songs and remembrance. And so like I really wanted to, and this is like something that I continue to sort of talk about and say, is that dhikr and salawat is just like this healings practice that, if anyone, needs in their life, they're feeling, in need, it is something that really is very prescriptive, which doesn't mean you don't go to a counselor, which doesn't mean you don't go to a therapist, which doesn't mean that you don't rely on the community and teachers and things like that. But it really helps you in your daily affairs. It helps kind of sort of ground you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like God, Almighty says that, remember me and I'll remember you. There is just so much prescription about remembrance. And so I think the idea of dhikr, I just kind of wanted to sort of leave it at that, and how important that was to Sahib. I think I'll sort of end at least my portion of the talk, and I'd love to have questions and conversation, and Imam Khalil can continue. I wanted to sort of read this testimony. I talked to several different people, when I was giving this talk, and I thought about, I was asking their perspective and advice, and one of the persons that I spoke to was Nusrat Ahmed, who's a Princeton alum from the years that this sort of transition was happening. And I was like, what does this mean to you? And she said, quote, "It changed my life." And these are just simple words, but they mean so much. And so I just wanted to read something that she wrote about it for this. She said, from 2018 onward, Imam Sahib began a quiet revolution in our community's Jummah. Every week after prayer, he invited sisters, not only from the Muslim Students Association, but also from the broader community, to lead the final dua. What might have seemed like a small change was in truth transformative. The dua is the last act everyone carries with them as they leave Jummah, the final words that linger in the heart. By inviting women to voice those prayers, Imam Sahib did two things at once. One, he reminded us that women's voices belong at the center of our worship. Number two, he created a Jummah space where sisters felt safe, welcomed, and essential, both prerequisites of love. For too long, many of the women were present in the room, but absent from the soundscape of Jummah. By inviting women to lead dua, Imam Sahib lifted that silence and replaced it with presence. Our voices became part of the rhythm of worship. It was not about novelty, but about wholeness. A community cannot be complete if half of its heart is muted. By making space for women's dua, he allowed the full heart of the community to speak to Allah. And in that shared outpouring, we witnessed a love that was bigger than any of us. This practice changed how we experienced community. We were no longer just attending Jummah, we were shaping it. It gave us a language to express not only our own hearts, but also the shared concerns of those around us. It taught us that dua could be both personal and collective, an external outpouring of love for Allah, voiced in many tongues. For me, it even sparked a love for writing and presenting. Preparing dua meant asking, what are we all carrying right now? What do we most need from Allah in this moment? That reflection became a way to connect more deeply with the community and with Allah. Imam Sahib's gift was not simply in the khutbahs he gave, but in the spaces he opened. By handing the microphone to women week after week, he modeled a prophetic leadership one rooted in humility, inclusivity, and trust. He left us with a living example of how love for Allah multiplies when everyone is given a voice in prayer. This is a legacy he built through years of Jummah, a community where dua was not limited to one person, but shared among many, where sisters knew without doubt that they belonged. Most imams are remembered for their words. Imam Sahib will be remembered for his trust. Trusting women with the last word of Jummah was his way of saying, I believe your voice can carry this community to Allah, and that trust week after week built a kind of love no khutbah alone could build. And this is, the voice of Nusrat Ahmed and her reflection. And I think the last thing that I'll say is that, Sahib wasn't ever, Sahib never wanted to rock the boat with anything. Like, it's amazing that mashallah, that his impact and his legacy speaks to that, because he wasn't trying to do anything so dramatic. And mashallah, Allah's protection has always been in this community. And so, to that effect, like, I also understood that. And as much as I love photographs and pictures and documenting, I never took so many pictures of this space. I never, really promoted it in that way, because you'd always said, this is what's working for our community here now. It may change in the future. I don't know what's going to work for another community. They need to sort of figure that out. And so we understood that this was a special thing that was happening here. And it could be something that other people could use. So it's not meant to be exclusive to us, but it wasn't something that I wanted to sort of, put out there and create sort of, uncertainty. And unless you come to the space, I think sometimes people they think of, oh my God, side by side. If you think about this, oh, the woman is doing this, like, it makes you unsure and uncertain. But when you feel it and when you experience it, it's a whole different matter, right? So I knew that in this case, pictures were not going to be something that was, and so I never promoted it in that way. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that this model exists, and that's okay. But for goodness sake, it's not something that we were hiding, but we weren't sort of putting out there. And so I just kind of wanted to kind of leave it at that and say that, alhamdulillah, like, I feel there's been so much benefit to this personally, for other people as well. It's been beautiful to sit together with the women. I love it, instead of being in this long line where you're just next to two, but now you're like, you feel like you're together with this, community of women, and which I think a lot of times men feel, but we don't always feel, because we are sort of stretched thin because of just spatial layout and things like that. So it's been so beautiful for me to be in this space. I hope you guys can, come and experience it sometime and just see what different spaces can look like, and hear a woman's dua. It's very special. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So much that Archie could share. She restrained herself. There's a lot there. I want to ask you all what you heard and what's on your heart, and share back to Archie how you're feeling and what you're thinking about. This question, these questions around women in Islam aren't questions. As I read, we get people to write wonderful words on the back of our books. And Ansa Tamara Gray, one of our scholars and teachers, she's in Minnesota. Still in Minneapolis?
Ansa Tamara Gray?
Yes.
Yeah, from Rabata.
Yes. Which you all should know. And by the way, I sent the PDF of this particular chapter. And in that chapter, Sohaib and Martin also mentioned a handful of female scholars, including Dr. Matson, but others. And I believe Asma Saeed is one of them.
Yes.
One of our alumna,
right,
who graduated from here and who now is at UCLA, directing the Islamic Studies program. So there's a lot of information in this PDF that we just simply did not have time to unpack. I think beyond the pastoral sensibilities, the listening, the prophetic model of that is really important. I think us as chaplains, and certainly Dr. Matson, encouraged us to look into the prophetic model for chaplaincy, for pastoral care. And once you begin to look for the prophet walking with others, listening to others, responding to others with care and compassion, you'll see that throughout the seerah, throughout his life, a person who at one point was, they said he had big ears. They tried to, he listened to everyone, right? He listened to everyone. Someone, whether they were poor, whether they were, not popular, unpopular, unpowerful, he was listening. And they would critique him and say, he listens to any and everyone. Right? And I do think that that's a pastoral sensibility, that we're here to listen, to try to respond the best way that we can. I do think that there's something about getting each of our students, our community members and others to listen to their voice, listen to what's being said inside, and to somehow respond to that in a way that's healthy, that is wholesome. Did you use the word wholesome?
I think so.
I love that
Wholesome,
word. I
holistic.
hear that word very often. Maybe I think that was yesterday. We were talking about wholesome. As a male, as an imam, as a father, as a husband, as a papa, granddad, I think it's important that our young men see in the prophet that he was advocating for women. He was advocating for women at a time where it wasn't popular. It wasn't popular. And you all know the state of women and the status of women in the 7th century. He was promoting their education, centering their voices. When women would see the prophet, peace be upon him, spend time with his companions, they would say, what about us? Will we have some time? And they would speak to one of his wives and say, go tell him that we want some time with him. And he would respond to that. So much so that we read that he would even designate some time to spend with him during the week. And so there is this responding to, this listening to, that I think is, for me, the most important part of this conversation. In addition, obviously, it's sort of the grounding this in Islamic practice and tradition, which I do think sometimes we don't think this is Islam, that there isn't a place for this sort of, which I love the word that both is in the chapter, but Archie loves this word and uses this word, and I think understands its importance, creativity, right? That there is room for creative acts in worship, in our spaces, in chaplaincy. Do you know when we pray Tarawih, you know that that's a creative practice, what they call innovation, the way that we pray all together. And there's a story, there's a story to this, right? But it's where we get the statement, the language of an act, of bid'ah, of innovation. It can be a good act, it can be an immediate or useful or beneficial innovation. Right? And I do think that, I think of that often, that there will always be needs, and there needs to be creative leaders in and women responding to the needs of those communities, and that will naturally bring about new ways of seeing things, new ways of doing things, but we're always trying to stay within the context, respect Islam, and the prophetic tradition. There's a lot of elasticity that allows us to do what I think is a beautiful and creative act that we've looked at. I would love to hear from our sisters, those who have. No. And also those who offer the dua as well, and sort of what that means for you all. Because I'm imagining if Sohaib was sitting here, he'd love to hear. He'd love to hear what this has meant for you all these years.
So this is the first time I'm hearing the story of how it all happened, and my brain just automatically be like, wait, she missed out on this detail. How did this happen? So I was just like, when you were talking about the beautiful divider,
Yes.
I was thinking, why did you brainstorm so much? Like, what do you guys know the existing, like, the foldable door type things? Like,
Right,
they
like
look the wooden and they have carvings in it too.
You know,
And
we
you
were
can fold them and put them
right.
away, like, and my brain was just like, why not just use 2 or 3 of those? It's just like easier to set up, easier to fold, easier to put away.
I think it was hard to find the carving. What we had found was the screens, which we didn't like. You know, like how some people have those screens that are So we that was easily accessible at least before, but it was hard to find. Like
Because these are like taller, a little taller than what we have right now. I
Mhm.
mean, you can adjust the height.
Right.
At least in Pakistan, it's like very common.
It's very
to have it in
common.
drawing
Yeah,
rooms and
yeah.
stuff. And it's just like it's easy to hold, it's easy to use, it's also beautiful.
I mean, listen, the model can totally be improved, and it would have been. I think we just couldn't find that easily here, and we didn't think internationally or whatever. But it needed to also be not too heavy because it needed to be moved.
They're not that
Yeah.
heavy.
Bismillah,
That's
man.
like
Room for,
Yeah.
you know, this is a dad joke. Even before Sohaib was a dad, like he did dad jokes. And I remember one of his jokes was like, he was like, Urshi, what's a room that every place should have? And he's like, room for improvement. So there's a room. I know. But I love playing
I
them.
have three.
So alhamdulillah, absolutely. Listen, beautification continues. I'm 100%. If it fits like the idea of ihsan, if it's tall enough, it's not heavy enough, cost effective, 100%.
Because I actually love the way Jim is set up right now.
Yeah.
I think, like what you were thinking, I actually think there's more privacy for women. When the guys are in the front and the girls are in the back,
Yeah.
you actually don't feel that secure in a way because like the entrance is still one. But right now we have like our own little cuddling space and we all just cuddle.
Actually, the
together.
entrance was also another issue because the room would overflow. The women would get stopped from coming in because it would be. So it was multiple things. I forgot to mention that. So it wasn't just being in the back, but also the entrance was a barrier.
And now
Because,
with all the babies, it's just
yeah.
nice. It's like a nice little.
exactly. So
family
the
before.
entrance actually allows for more access.
Question number 2 was, what barrier did you guys use at Mizan? Because you said you guys used. the
Yeah,
smart
Mizan has been difficult, and it you know there's room for improvement there because it's also outdoors. So like these things were too hard to bring because of just logistics. There we were using curtains that we were trying to tack down by rocks. They weren't as high. We wish they were a little bit higher. So it's something that we would like to improve on. But there were curtains, and they weren't as high. But that space allowed for it because we had the curtains, but then we weren't just tucked away so close. There was room to sort of be like, oh hey, we could spread a little bit to the right, and
It was outdoors. So
it was
yeah,
outdoors, and like the
huge.
space was so large that it accommodated that. So the barrier was a little bit lower, but then we were allowed to not be so close to each other. But it was like these curtains that had a Mizan logo on it. So we tried to beautify it, but room for improvement. And we love more creativity.
Question number 3 is something
Yes.
that I think is still. Sorry, this is my last question. I promise. Something that's still like I still hear, and I'm sure that you guys heard it at that time as well, and it's probably something that you guys had to creatively think about and find a solution that satisfied. When you had satisfactory answers, that's why you moved forward with it.
Mm-hmm.
But like even now, sometimes like when Hassan and I invite someone to Jannah, they're just like, oh, we can't come to Jannah because a woman comes to the sacred place where the imam is supposed to be, and then he makes a dua, and
Okay.
you know, a woman isn't supposed to come there.
And how do you? Yeah.
And we just look like, yeah, okay. Like, I don't know how to justify it. I don't have any answer. That's why I'm asking you. How did you guys answer questions like this? What justifications did you give people?
I mean, subhanAllah, I think you know. I mean, alhamdulillah, like subhanAllah, people have not asked me that question, so I haven't had to like engage it. But it's such a good. It's obviously a question because it's an uncertain space. Like not an uncertain. It's a new space, and so anything that's different makes people uneasy, right? So that in itself is something that, and even anyone who, and then if I had walked into a space like this, like I can understand differences make people uneasy and sort of trying to grapple. And these are the right questions. So I think it's great that this person's asking this
remember
question.
the first day,
Yeah.
the very
That it was
first day it was
initiated.
going
Yeah,
to
tell me.
happen. So Suhaib, and this also goes to like how vigilant he was, how inclusive he was. So, and he's always thinking about, you know, everybody included and nobody feels like they don't belong. So he was very cognizant of the people that they will be thrown off by. And they may think that, oh, what is that, you know? So he did make an announcement the very first day that we are going to do this, we're going to introduce this. This is very much within the fiqh in Sharia. And if you have any issue, you have any question, please come to me and talk to me about it. And I have answers.
And so I think it's I mean
So I don't know,
to
maybe
what
people might
Seema
have gone.
exactly. I'm plenty of
sure,
people
yeah,
talk to
yeah,
him
yeah.
for sure. And I
So,
think to your
yeah.
point, I think like anyone who brings this up, this is your opportunity for conversation and engagement. Sort of say, okay, what is it that bothers you about it? fiqh-wise, Jummah is completed. Is it a woman's voice that's bothering you? It's not part of like, there's nothing wrong with it from.
They just say that the minbar is a holy space, and
the minbar is a holy space.
We've had this. I have so many, like, I could go on because I've engaged in this conversation multiple times, and I personally like the way it's set up, but I still like have these lingering questions and doubts, and I was like, this is a good
The
opportunity.
minbar is a holy space. ... Yeah, so it's beautiful that a woman can go up. So you can make that argument, but what does that mean? A minbar is a holy space. Like trying to then break that logic down, like, and figuring out like. So is it a holy space for men? Do you know like what does that mean?
It's a space that has historically only been taken up by a man, and he has been like doing recitation, khutbah, and all of that.
Right.
And nowhere in history can they find a woman coming up on the minbar to do anything.
And what's interesting about this space is that it's also a multi-purpose space. So this is not a masajid in many ways, right? So this is not an exclusive minbar that's there. It's a movable minbar. The minbar moves. So I think sort of engaging with that, which is then it can be a different conversation for a different space that might be a masajid. So that's a separate question altogether. But for this is not a masjid in many ways. And when people say this is a masjid, it's not. It's a multi-purpose space that is become a prayer space for people, and it's Jummah space, it's other spaces. So I think that argument can be engaged. I really like that.
I guess so. Like the way to explain it for it is the minbar ends once the Jummah ends.
Yeah, the minbar like.
Now it's just a.
When I cast it out, Jummah is over. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu. Jummah is done. Right. I do think it's what our. It's like is it the woman's voice?
I don't think it's the woman's voice.
Because many of us go. We got women professors. We go sit 3 hours and listen to a lecture about biology or whatever, right? And every move, right? We're watching. So
I think they're looking at historical precedent, and there's like, this is the only thing I know.
Yeah. But we just need to. I like my logic to be consistent, right? Instead of like, oh, I'm religious here, but everything outside of the sacred space, I can. Women are all good, and I can. But when I get in my religious space, women. That for me is not consistent. That's not consistent for me. That's part of why it's important for me to have this conversation with more men on these space, so that we can have these more in-depth conversations. Because they want to know the fit. Is this halal? Is it haram? And I think I think there are ways to have that conversation. And if they move so hey, then they might not ask all those questions, right?
Right. I'm sure some people might have.
No, absolutely. And it goes back to the fact that this is what's worked in this space and at this time and this way, and each space has to kind of. But yeah, to that person, I'd love to have a conversation with them.
Defer to Harsh, don't send them my way. You have a
no, you should talk to them.
Also, I also feel like, the society that we live in, we're completely bombarded, being compared with, women are like, we are like men, men can do it, why can't we do it, this whole thing. So I think a lot of time people sort of want to, double check or maybe very, very conscious about it, like what place you're coming from, are we like, giving into that hyper,
that narrative,
that we have to be equal and we have to, to prove ourselves as women, we have to be able to do everything that men can do. So I think, people come from that space as well.
And they're reactive to that.
But
then sort of breaking down where you're coming from, where is this? This is holistic, this is beautiful, this is sacred.
So I think it's good to have a conversation.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. Imam,
I see
yeah.
Sayyidina Muhammad
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam
was very progressive for his time, and so was Suhaib. So he was his role model, and he was actually really, like following the footsteps of Sayyidina Muhammad. And they were both very progressive for their time.
Being inclusive, having multiple doors open to carry people, but obviously within a space of Sharia framework, exactly. But bringing them in, that wide tent that he would talk about.
Only Allah knows, the relationship between a person and Allah.
I think there was a
Wasim, you want to share something? Go ahead, Wasim, share it.
Muskara. Aw.
Regarding like whoever like had the conversation, so I would just say like if it's the voice, so our mother was teaching the Prophet and she was teaching like male, so the voice should never have their knowledge about it. Like
It's not the voice is not the issue, right? It's the space. It's like
and also about the space. Kaaba, so is the place like the never women were abandoned from there. So women and men can go together in Kaaba, so they should never question the number.
Yeah, there's multiple like things to consider.
To us, you are. I mean, you were next. I mean, there were women like we were together, like really tight with each other. And if you go to the Prophet's Masjid, it's side by side. It's just big. They're not behind us.
Right,
They're
right.
not,
Spatially.
Not behind the men. It's just such a big. They're actually side by side. You just have to get to the point where it starts. You see it, right? So there's a precedent for it. We just don't. We don't want to see it sometimes. Wasim, and then there's some of our sisters who made the dua. I really
Yeah.
want to hear
Sure.
your thoughts. How you feel about it.
So-
Wasim is doing. He's being so good right now.
So, just to come back to the member question, it just so happens this member is also shared by the Catholics and Hindus, the Lutherans, and so there is no purification process before Jummah that it goes through. So whoever is coming up with that doesn't know Princeton University.
Take the Zamzam water and wash it down.
So-
That's okay, but that's part of the conversation. And
And so it's true. This what evolved at Princeton University was a combination of a whole bunch of things, a unique space in a university setting campus, like you mentioned. This is not a masjid. It was just a multi-purpose room that all faiths share. There's no restriction here. This is masjid. This is this. Although we have a space upstairs, now 2 rooms, but bless us, we've expanded the space in which there is kind of, space has been created. But still, this is the member question. Just ask him that, it was not purified with any water before the Jummah because it was shared by a Hindu maybe a few hours earlier. So that and the other part, which I think is besides the progressive side, besides the student body here, and I'm using progressive in your sense in that way, not progressive in terms of pushing anything. The thing here with this university was that the inclusive. One of the things that Archie probably mentioned, but would Imam Sahib started this conversation series. You mentioned that, but in that conversation series, men and women were sitting together in the rooms. The students and community members were sitting in the same room, going through Quran verse at a time. Everybody was reading it, one verse at a time, one ayat at a time, and then they were discussing it. And so there was already this whole, churning of the conversation that was going on. And so it was not just one isolated thing that took it in this direction. It was a multitude of little things here and there, etc. And then the participation of our community, especially our community mothers, literally. A few of them are sitting there. The community mothers who organize the Eid and the Iftar and the this and the that, and Archie was so engaged. Archie was, when she was around, I always called her, she was the older sister of every freshman in the school. So it was like everybody was coming to her. I mean, I have a feeling more people went to Archie to ask questions than they went to Imam, because she had, a different approach towards answering the question. So there so many things. The stars literally lined up for this to happen. here in this space, in this time. And so there is no question that the success of this model became solidified now, with your continuing of it. Into that, I should also add, he got Sohaib got support of the community as well. And in that sense, it was not a case that just the students were supporting it. These were immigrants, moms and dads, older people who were part of the community system of Princeton University. They were supporting this whole process. So multiple things were happening, not just one spark or one thing. So it has been a great success, and I wish more. I wish more would be done in these directions. I have plenty of ideas. Thank you.
And I know we're at monitor time, so I just want to, but I do want to give some time.
No, I want to hear
for some
the
thoughts
last
and-
couple of thoughts.
Yeah, I guess just, thank you so much, Sister Archie, for these really, really inspiring thoughts, and also to everyone else. I think it was especially interesting for me because I'm a senior now, but when I first entered Princeton, I actually never had the opportunity to meet, our beloved moms, names are gone. But I had heard a lot about it, and my parents were deeply revered here, and I, in fact, actually during COVID years, I believe Gemma used to be on Zoom. Something like
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they would send me the Zoom link, and I would join the Zoom link, and I would listen to these beautiful thoughts. And then subhanAllah, when I entered Princeton, I had the chance to meet Imam Khalil, who's also such a beloved member of our community, and so much to learn. And so just like, I think Sister Aisha, I didn't know actually the origin of the tradition of this, it's a very beautiful tradition. And a lot of what, there was a lot of different components that you mentioned in your talk that I thought was very profound, but I'll go back to one of the earlier ones that you mentioned, that verse from the Quran, the believing men and women, that repetition of the believing men and women, and I think that's very intentional, like that diction is very intentional, because it reinforces the fact that, yes, as some of these people who are raising concerns will mention, yes, there are differences between men and women, but at the end of the day, the goal is still the same. And so it's important to have each of their voices lifted up. And to be quite honest, like, in my experience, both going to whatever the traditional masajid versus coming to Jummah, like, I genuinely just feel more like a part of the community when I come to Jummah here. It's like standing side by side. I can see Imam Khalil directly when he gives the khutbah, as opposed to like watching him from a TV screen at the masajid. I just think it's just so much more of an interactive experience that allows a believer, not just necessarily a man or a woman, to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and connect with the words of the person giving the khutbah. And so I just think that, and then I think there was a lot of things that you were sort of mentioning during your conversation, and I think it's just so important that, we keep that alive. Like, as somebody who has given a dua before, I by no means, like, I know that there are some people here who maybe not have or kind of avoiding it, and it's by no means that I feel that I'm in any way, shape, or form, like, eligible to give, like, some kind of scholarly advice. Like, I'm just, a person. I make mistakes. I have, flaws. But it's more so about engaging with your community. Just, looking down at your, not down, but, like, looking at your friends. While you were talking about some of the shared struggles that, we talk about, whether it's from regards to Palestine, or even things like, oh, let's hope the semester goes well. Just like these simple things that maybe you won't get at like the traditional experience, like just being able to connect with your peers at any age over such shared struggles of our day is just such like a powerful thing to do. And especially seeing my own peers, stand at this bar and talk to me and like mention some of these things. I know some of you have given absolutely beautiful dua before. Like, I'm often like sometimes drawn to tears. They're just so beautiful. And yeah, I just think that it's just such a wonderful experience, and I think it really does go back to as I think one of you was mentioned. I think it was you, sister. But I think the progressiveness of Suhaib so far. And I think that, yeah, I think it's just because I never really understood. It was just something that was already enacted when I had already come here. I think it's so important to keep that traditional vibe. Like, I know that we struggle a lot to like find somebody to give the dua at Bujuma, but I do think that it's something that we should definitely keep up because it's something that people can consider progressive, but it's more so you can think of it as like engaging the community to be more connected during such a special day. And thank you so much, Sarge, for like giving us more insights on that. I think it was really beautiful. And as a senior, like I really hope to like sort of like convey that importance down to my peers, leave that like legacy here, especially. So yeah.
No, thank you so much. That's beautiful reflections, and then like just the dua, and I do want to engage more with the students and the community, female members specifically, and to say that these duas are so beautiful. Like it allows you to learn about dua. I was talking to actually Yusra Sayed, who was the assistant to the Muslim chaplain when this was happening, and she ended up giving a lot of the duas, and she was saying, Arshi, like it was so beautiful for me to curate it, compose it, learn how to give dua. Like it gives you so much. It empowers you to learn about how do you give dua, how do you write a dua. It's only doing more for you, and then just to have that confidence for people that anyone can do this. And dua is our personal, obviously. Like we make dua all the time, so sort of to say, hey, you can do this for the community as well. I think it's a project that you and I need to work on, and to also sort of make it very like natural. And if someone has hesitation, sort of engage that and sort of like let's have a conversation of why you're having that feeling and what is it about it? Does it feel too sacred? Is it tough? Is it unique? Do you feel unsure about it? So sort of tackle that as well. Thank you so much.
If I may quickly, especially during the COVID, because you were only listening, you were not looking at the faces. There were some of the duas were so beautiful. They were so. I wish you would compile and put them together. I mean, I think I've written a few times to you also that can I get that dua? Because sometimes the words that have been chosen for these duas have been absolutely immaculate and stunning. So
Most of the time, you're better than the
Yeah.
I cry like a baby every time I listen to it. I'm like, oh my God. And the magic there is most of the time there's something in the dua that had to do with the khutbah. I mean, I hear it maybe sometimes
It complements it, enhances it.
It's an interesting sort of thing. And what Lena and I are always amazed at, and I've been here, this is my 5th year, and like we've been doing this for a long time, and like that's a lot of weeks for us to keep this tradition going. That's a lot of sisters over 10 years, every single week. And I mean, it's like you don't want to like be the one. I'm the one who like stop the street, and we've missed some here and there. And I used to be like, oh my God, this is. Archie would say, well, they can read another.
Absolutely.
They don't have to. Doesn't have to be. You can read something, which I think also speaks to something else about it. Doesn't have to be from you, but it's also the act of being there, even reading someone else's words. But I think having a woman in that position, it would be interesting to think. We're growing, so we're going to have another sort of moment, where we have to think together as a community. Okay, if we end up in CAF, but we're going to end up somewhere outside of Murray Dodge in the next year or two, right? Or if we end up in Frisk, do we keep it's big now, right? We can sit be in the back and we can be in the front. Are we going to keep our model in the middle? And if so, we need a lot more screens. We got to go to Home Depot and build some more screens because that's a lot, right? So I do think that this conversation we're going to have another community conversation as we grow. We want to maintain this. I certainly want to maintain this. But what does that look like? And how does the community and the students embrace that? Because it will require us to do that together as we grow and find ourselves in a different space.
And be creative.
A different space. Again, I know it's time, but I want to give everyone just an opportunity to share, to say what's on their mind, on their heart.
It's more just as a brother, like say like you sometimes when you were hearing that was really wanted to have it. So it was interesting once that sister was not Muslim. She was sitting back there, like where we are doing so like with the sofas and all that. And so I gave the dua. I knew it was not a perfect dua. Maybe it was from my heart. So she just told me, I really love the because I mentioned there like yalla like all the human like they're all your like you have created them. So you see them, they're doing nice things, like give them hidayah. So you are the creator. And she said that part really touched me because I also believe like we are there is a God. So can I have your dua? But I couldn't have the courage. Like so can you share? I said I would make it a little bit more perfect and I would give it to you. I said no, like I'm serious, like I wanna read your dua. Like she was that sister was not Muslim and she walked with me back and she talked like how you included it. I said, yeah, that's how we have to do. It's not like Allah is not just for Muslims. And then we shared like conversation about it. So sometimes it touches like everyone, not just it shouldn't be just for the Muslims. It's like
You touched her heart. You like spoke to her heart.
yeah.
Probably because it was from your heart. It wasn't written down. So, I tell my students all the time, you have a thesis in front of you every Friday. I wish someone would like pick up on Martin and Sohaib's chapter and expand on it because there's a thesis, there's a dissertation every single Friday. No one's really written. There's a lot of opportunity to write more about what we're doing here. And we don't see it happening anywhere else, not at another college campus or university. I think that's something to also explore and ask why not. But it also speaks to the uniqueness of this space. And I think what makes this space very special. So, any thoughts? I'm as co-president. No, I'm just messing. And that's it. Archie, thank you. Did you have any thoughts?
I'm cooking.
Okay. Archie, we are grateful. We are grateful. We could listen to you another hour or two, and I feel.
Should come more often.
Yeah. So we should have.
Well, the
you back.
conversations continue. I
More
always
often.
say that the conversations continue. They never
We'll
stop.
have her back, and I've heard you
Whether
speak.
here
Like to
or
also speak
formally.
to some of the sisters and spend some time.
Yeah.
There may be some opportunity there. So
Wait a minute,
we'll
what's wrong with me?
you're stuck with me. We like hanging out. We like hanging out. Lena, any thoughts? Anything that I'm missing? As Archie said, we hope the conversation continues. There are probably a lot of questions that have not been asked and not been answered. Continue to think about this, and any thoughts you have, please share with me or Archie. We will encourage Archie to somehow make the time, to find the time. She may ask us for a little help, but we do want her to gather all of those du'as and do something for all of us. I think that would be a great benefit to all of us, and maybe the first or early step to more and more that we can do around this topic. So, we thank you so much for
May
your
I make a
time.
request?
Yes, sir.
She closes with a dua.
I was gonna ask one of our sisters.
Yeah, that
to
would be so
close
lovely.
with the dua. Any of our sisters wanna make dua?
Ruba,
closing the dua?
Ruba, why don't you grace us with that? Simple. Simple. Bismillah.
Bismillah.
Lord, please bless this gathering. Bless the people over here. Bless all the Muslims all over the world. And bless Brother Suhaib, for he is the reason for why we are gathered. May Allah forgive us. May Allah forgive us. May Allah forgive us.
صراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. May Allah forgive us. May Allah forgive
That's
us.
it.
May Allah forgive us.
Paramount.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. My heart is full.